Hi, it's Sierra. Welcome back. Today we're going to do a deep dive on literary magazines. This is something I'm really passionate about. I talk a lot on my Instagram about submitting to lit mags and the importance of having a submission strategy. I host Submission September every fall where I encourage writers to submit once a day or really just as often as you can because it's important to get your work out there and it takes a long time to hear back from literary magazines. So it's incredibly important to get on it. So I wanted to take some time and talk about what is a literary journal, right? How do you know where to submit your work? What can you expect from that process? So today we're going to go through all of that. I thought it would be fun to start with just an overview of some of the lit mags I have in my library. This is Welter. This is actually very special to me. This was my first print publication outside of my college literary magazine. They published my short story called The Ovenbird Problem. This is very precious to me because this was part of the short story collection I worked on in college called Eden Will Be Lonesome, which became my novel, Nuclear Family. So this was Nuclear Family's debut in a way, and this came out in 2017, and it's very, very precious to me. So that's really fun. I did not publish this until I was in grad school, so I have a lot of people who ask me, can I get into an MFA without publications? Yes, absolutely. That's kind of, in many ways, the point. They're looking for writers who are emerging and are going to be publishing more things. Yes, absolutely. They're looking for writers who are emerging. You do not need to be worried about this if you are still in the process of applying or looking toward an MFA program. So a literary magazine is a publication that publishes fiction, nonfiction, poetry, genre arts, sometimes photography, and every literary magazine is different. Sometimes they have themes like this one. Saw Palm is a Florida-based literary magazine, so a lot of the work they publish, though not all, is focused on the South, in particular Florida. Other times they have stylistic differences. Some are more experimental, some are more traditional, some only publish fiction, some only publish nonfiction, poetry. You get the picture. And so as you start to submit and read more literary magazines, you will get a sense for where your work will fit best in the marketplace of literary magazines. Now, one of the things I did in grad school, which I would encourage you guys to do, is I started submitting book reviews. Those tend to be easier to publish than creative fiction or nonfiction just because the market is less competitive. And so I placed a book review in a pretty prestigious journal. This is the Chattahoochee Review. I also published this when I was in graduate school. And this was really important for me because it allowed me to have something on my creative writing resume cover letter, when you are submitting work. But it wasn't as difficult, if you will, to get a piece in there. So that's something to consider if you are like, I have no publications and I need to get something out there. Start to do some book reviews. In order to publish a book review in a literary magazine, you're typically looking at a new release, right? Something that just came out, hasn't been widely reviewed. We're often looking at books by indie presses or smaller university houses. So I wish that I could subscribe to everything. I wish I had infinite time to read all day, every day, but I don't. And literary magazines, they get expensive, right? You cannot realistically subscribe to probably even more than like 2 of these. Now, some people will disagree with me on that, but this is what I found to be true. I pretty much have like one subscription usually, and I typically pick one story. We'll talk about that more in a little bit about why I love them. But you just can't subscribe to them all, and that's okay. So here's what I do to learn more about literary magazines. I look at where the writers I like are publishing, okay? So let's take a short story collection, for example. Okay, let's look at Blacklight. It's a collection of stories by Kimberly King Parsons. In the front of the short story collection, there is this little page, and it outlines where the stories were previously published. So let's see. There was a piece in Black Warrior Review, New South, Nanofiction, Ninth Letter, Indiana Review, Joyland, etc. This is a great trick. So if you find a short story collection that you love, and maybe you think, hey, my work is in a similar vein and style, you can look and see where they previously published their short stories, and that can give you a really good idea of where to submit your work as well. Because it simply is just unrealistic to think that you have read every single literary magazine out there. It's not possible. This is not what happens. Okay, so that's a good trick to try. The other thing that I do is I go to author websites. If they are a short story writer, I look and see where they've published, where they place pieces, the types of journals, and that really helps me. The other thing, and this might be a given for those of you who are in the literary world full-time, is you can learn a lot at AWP, which is that writing conference I talked about in my last video. This is where I really gain exposure to all the lit mags that are out there. I try to read a little bit of a lot of different magazines. You get a lot of free copies, and that's where I largely base my submission plan for the year. So that's also really helpful. Go in person, meet the editors, ask them what they're looking for. You can also ask them, this is my trick question, what do you really not want to see anymore? So for example, I asked one editor at a literary magazine this question, and he said nothing political, which kind of surprised me because some of my short stories are political, and I was like, okay, would not have gotten that from your website, because most websites for lit mags just say, we want the best. But that's not very helpful, right? Because everyone's definition of the best is different. So that has really helped me talk to the editors in person, ask them those specific questions, and take notes so you do not forget. I tend to publish a lot of flash fiction. Now, flash fiction means really, really short pieces. I personally love my longer short stories. They have my heart. I want to be a novelist. It's my love. But I have found that my shorter pieces tend to be picked up more. And I think that this is because it's easier for a small literary magazine, look how tiny this is, to publish a short story that's 2 pages long than a short story that's 30 pages long, because then they're giving me like a huge chunk of their journal. So I have had a much easier time publishing flash fiction. I think this was the copy of Agni that I'm in. If not, it's the gift copy, but we'll double check. Yep, I'm in this one. So there we go. I've got a flash fiction piece in Agni, flash fiction in Lumina. I had a flash fiction piece in Ghost Parachute that was part of their anthology, which was super, super cool for me. But yeah, this is a bit of recommendation. If you are a fiction or nonfiction writer, doing micro and flash pieces can also really help you. So, One Story. One Story is my all-time favorite literary magazine because they publish just one story at a time. It's not overwhelming to get a magazine and be like, I do not have time to read through this entire thing. You can literally read it in like 20 minutes. So definitely check them out. They have some amazing, amazing work, and they are regularly placing pieces in Best American, Pushcart, etc. Okay, so how do I actually go about submitting? Well, you need to have a submittable account in most cases, though some journals still use their own submission servers. So if you make a submittable account, it will prompt you to add in a cover letter. Okay, now this is really simple. I have a lot of writers who freak out and say, I don't know what to put there. That's okay. It can be just, dear editor, thank you for considering blank, and put in the title, right? And then I'm a writer and I live in St. Louis. Okay, that's where I live right now. So don't worry about it. You do not need to have a long publishing credits. When I was a reader for the Florida Review, this was actually very annoying. We would have writers send a whole bio and like, we're not going to read that. Also, it doesn't matter that you're published in 20 magazines we've never heard of. So don't stress about it. In many cases, these are read blind. So the fact that this might be your first publication is absolutely not a problem. Okay. So you can use Submittable or use the servers that they prompt you to use on their website. Now, one thing to keep in mind, every magazine has different submission guidelines. Read these carefully. Sometimes they are strict that you cannot have your last name anywhere on the document. Sometimes they're strict about page count. Sometimes it has to be a PDF, etc. So just make sure that you read the submission guidelines very carefully. Let's talk simultaneous submissions. This is something I'm also asked about a lot. A simultaneous submission means that your short story is out at 2 publications at once, okay? Now, a lot of journals don't like this, okay, because it means that they might accept it and then it's picked up somewhere else. So just make sure that you watch and see if they accept simultaneous submissions, okay? And then when you are submitting your work in your cover letter, if it is a simultaneous submission, make sure that you say it is. Please consider, or please note that this is a simultaneous submission, okay? Here is then what you need to do with that information. If your short story is picked up by one journal, you need to withdraw it from all the other journals that might still have it. All right? Do not forget to do this. It looks very unprofessional if one journal comes back and says yes. You forget to tell everyone else, and then they also want it. This is bad, okay? It makes you look very unprofessional, and it wastes their time, because then they have spent time reading your work, sharing with their editorial team, going through their whole process, and they have now accepted a piece that has already been accepted. So if you are sending out a simultaneous submission, the responsibility is on you to make sure that if it's picked up, you withdraw it responsibly from everywhere else. Okay, that is my crash course on literary journals. I hope you learned a lot. If you have any questions, let me know. If you have any resources, please put them in the comments. I'm excited to see what you guys have to say.